assessment of its work programme and priorities for 2023. The provision of school places, including for children with special education needs, is a priority for the Department, and officials are working to ensure that sufficient provision is there in St Mary's Primary School for future years. And according to the figures that I have, while the enrolment in Carrick-on-Shannon will be relatively stable, they project over the next 5 or 6 years. But I do note that St Mary's Primary School has seen an 8% increase in enrolment over the last 5 years, and for 2022 the enrolment was 495, so I would expect that to grow. And I want to thank you for your advocacy there, and there is no doubt that the building officials in the department are listening to the school and listening to you, Deputy, in the representations that are being made. Thank you. Thanks
to Deputy Fianna and Mr Byrne for dealing with that important matter. The fourth and final matter comes to Deputy Mark O'Cahasick, who wishes to discuss upland burning and land management practices, something that's very topical. Thanks to Ms Minister Noonan for being here to deal with this matter.
Yeah, thank you indeed, Ken Corla, and it is very topical. Just this week gone, as we approach that cut-off period for the moratorium on controlled burning, the 1st of March, we saw uplands all across the country ablaze, Minister Noonan. Quite a lot of it down in Kerry, I'd say. So Killarney National Park near the Mangerton area, the Dingle Peninsula, the western side of McGillicuddy's Reeks, Strickeen Mountain and the Gap of Dunloe, Mount Gabriel, crossing into West Cork, on the Mizen Peninsula, in the north of your own constituency, in the Blackstairs Mountain, Minister. There were some small fires in the Comers in my own constituency. But I was put in mind of when I saw the pictures on social media during the course of earlier this week. I was put in mind of something I remember very clearly from last September, 1st of September, just as we came out of the moratorium period. And as it happens, I was going to West Cork to attend the Joint Oireachtas Committee on the Islands visit to Beara. And I could see on the 1st of September, setting a line clear as day across the brow of the Comers, the burn set. And I came back 2 days later, and the mountain was blackened. I want to be very careful about language here, Minister, because it's a season where controlled burning is allowed. And what I observed last September in the Comers, and what I think has been observed across West Cork and Kerry, and as I said in the Blackstairs, can in no way, shape or form be described as controlled burning. And I also want to be careful because there are people in this House who would like to put words in my mouth and say that I'm vilifying certain communities or demonising certain communities. And I absolutely am not. I, in fact, went to the Comer Mountains very recently, met with the people of the Comer Uplands and Communities EIP project, Willie Drone and other members of the sheep farming community up above towards Mahon Falls, on the far side of the mountain from the Mahon Falls. And they're as equally incensed by uncontrolled burning as I am, because in their minds that reflects badly on them, on their practices, on how they manage their landscape. And it has a huge impact, as we all know, on our biodiversity. And these are important breeding grounds for the likes of the red grouse, for the hen harrier, for skylarks, for the curlew. These are all amber or red listed birds. And we find ourselves in a biodiversity crisis. And yet we have this level of burning still happening on our mountainsides. So my questions, Minister. Controlled burning, as we know, is legal, and many responsible landowners engage in the practice. What we saw last weekend was not controlled, and I wanted to ask, have we seen prosecutions for this type of uncontrolled burning, which happens within season? I know you've done enormous work on reforming the MPWS. How do we stand in terms of the resource within the MPWS to police this kind of burning? We need to talk about funding for farmers, because the fact of the matter is this model isn't working for sheep farmers either, and it's the first thing that they'll tell you. They can't make money on the wool. They make very little money on the sheep themselves, and they're forced into a system where they have to try and manage and control the landscape. So what is our funding model doing? What is it pushing our farmers towards? And crucially, Minister, crucially, what is our vision in the long term When we look at these mountains and imagine how we want them to behave in terms of biodiversity, in terms of carbon sequestration, in terms of water management, what do those mountainsides look like? And are we communicating that vision to the people who know those mountainsides best and who are best placed, in fact, if we fund it properly and support it properly, to make the changes in that land use management that we need to see?
Thank you, Deputy O'Cahasick. Minister, please.
Gorse ceann córagus bhualam buics a gháil leis an teachta as an gceist tábhachta seo. The management of Ireland's upland areas is a responsibility shared by many, including land users, landowners and various bodies and agencies tasked with its management. My focus as Minister in this regard is the protection of nature. Sustainable grazing is an important nature conservation measure. My department's MPWS Farm Plan Scheme and the EU Life Wild Atlantic Nature Project are examples of how locally targeted and adapted agri-environmental measures can be highly effective when implemented in high environmental priority areas across the country, including upland Natura 2000 sites, and are highly valued by the people who take part in them. I unreservedly condemn the recent spate of fires, and I want to thank all of the Fire and Emergency Service who risked life and limb to tackle and bring these fires under control. They've caused significant environmental damage in upland areas. Some refer to this, as the Deputy has rightly said, planned or controlled burning. And this is a misnomer. If it gets out of hand, which it invariably does, then it is uncontrolled burning. In fact, it's worse. It's indiscriminate burning and causes criminal damage to nature, to water, to property and indeed people's health. And there are incidents where I've looked at the Red Grouse project and particularly in Scotland where controlled burning can be effective. So I just want to say that I think it's important that it can be an effective tool. But I've had correspondence this week as well from residents living down those parts of Kerry that you referenced, who've had to remain in their houses with their children while those fires are burning, and it is grossly irresponsible. It is critically important that every member of society realises the damage that can be caused to property and indeed to the health and welfare of a family, of neighbours and the wider community, and the responding emergency services. The main source of these fires is deliberate starting of fires without concern for the consequences. The MPWS works closely with the fire services, the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine and An Garda Síochána as appropriate to investigate the causes of fires in our national parks and reserves, protected sites and the wider countryside. This week, the National Parks and Wildlife Service has deployed increased fire patrols across sites, including aerial monitoring, with eyes in the sky over the past number of days. Where appropriate, cross-compliance is pursued with the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine. My staff are committed to finding solutions to these fires, and I call on all stakeholders, including local communities, to work with us to find a way forward. Where evidence is forthcoming, appropriate enforcement under the Wildlife Acts and other legislation will be pursued. However, it should be noted that due to the sheer scale of the land involved here, coupled with the remote locations of lands, the sporadic occurrence and dynamic nature of such fires, it is simply not possible to provide a universal and visible presence as a deterrent on the ground. My National Parks and Reserves network alone covers some 87,000 hectares, and approximately 14% of the state is designated either as special areas of conservation or special protected areas, which much of this land is in private ownership. These are areas at the heart and lungs of our country, and trying to identify those who deliberately set fires in open areas without concern for the consequences can be challenging. I am pleased to report, however, that our ground patrols have interrupted some of those setting fires in recent days, and there are a number of live criminal investigations underway. Furthermore, the overflights enable us to identify the seats of such fires and, as a consequence, pursue both criminal prosecutions under the Wildlife Acts and cross-compliance penalties with the Department of Agriculture. The issue here at question is of individuals being more responsible for the actions they take and being mindful of the potential damage to life, nature and property that can be caused by deliberately setting fires. Perpetrators of these acts are known in their communities, and I would ask for information to be given in confidence to the MPWS and Garda confidential line so that the illegal and uncontrolled fires can be investigated. Nobody has the right to unilaterally declare that they are going to burn land indiscriminately. These acts, in my view, fall into the category of socially unacceptable as they damage entire communities and frankly give all, including those who act responsibly, a bad name. And it is that irresponsibility that is now driving the extensive calls for a change in the law. In any event, it is probably timely to look again at the 6-month period during which burning may take place, especially in light of changing climate and weather patterns, nesting and breeding habitats and international nature compliance obligations.
Thank you for that response, Minister. And I was very conscious about the language that I used and how specific I wanted to be, because I want to talk about uncontrolled burnings. And as I said, I have been out with those hill and sheep farmers, and they have shown me the manpower that they need in order to perform a controlled burn, and that's not what we're talking about. I'm not talking about instances of responsible land management, but I mean, if Cromwell sent the Irish people to hell or to Connacht, we've sent our biodiversity and our wildlife to hedge our upland. That's it. Those are the reserves that we have left, and even those now are under enormous pressure. That's what we saw this weekend gone. I think, Minister, that this is one of we hear the phrase "just transition" often spoken about here, but here's an example where just transition, where the rubber needs to meet road, because what we have is a model for the people who work on that land, and they spoke to me so passionately about, you know, how attached they are to their landscape. They can't make a bob out of it. They're forced into practices that they don't agree with themselves. And they have the very skills, the very knowledge, the very experience that we need to unlock to make these biodiversity-rich habitats functioning for carbon sequestration and functioning for water management. And I have a community in Waterford, a community of hill farmers, and Minister Butler will know these people as well. Great people. And they are ready for it. They are ready to participate in projects and initiatives that manage this landscape better. They have the tools, they have the skills. Let's engage with them, and let's make sure the funding is acting in the right way, and let's share with them that vision. We've seen some of it in Owen Dalton's amazing book on the Irish rainforest. We've seen some examples in the Scottish Highlands. Let's spell it out to people. Let's show them what we think these landscapes could look like, and the richness and the value and the worth we can build into these landscapes if we only just appropriately fund it.
Thank you, Deputy.
Again, I agree wholeheartedly with everything you've said in relation to we need farmers, we need landowners on our land in Uplands. Conservation grazing works, and I think it's an important role to play in nature restoration. My department is currently conducting a review of wildlife legislation, and this is an extensive review and a multi-year project taking in every facet of our wildlife laws. It will examine closely the effectiveness of our legislation in protecting wildlife and regulating activities that adversely impact on wildlife and biodiversity. In particular, it will look at how we can improve the deterrent in respect of wildlife crime and the enforceability of our wildlife laws. I am keen that our laws offer the best protection possible for wildlife and biodiversity, are based on sound scientific and ecological advice, and strike a fair balance between economic, social needs and the needs of wildlife. The burning season is one area that will be looked closely at as part of this review. And it should be remembered that, what is being damaged through unsustainable land management practices is a precious national resource. My department expends considerable resources in managing our national parks and heritage sites right around the country, and in the protection and conservation of valuable landscapes, biodiversity, flora and fauna, and they are a valuable social resource. And again, just in summary, Deputy, I think my department will continue to work along closely with land users in Upland and other areas to pursue effective management for nature. We are clear that we need our landowners, we need our farmers to conserve and restore nature. In the Slieve Blooms, you talk about the Cummers. I again recently saw effective upland vegetation management, creating mosaic habitats that can have a positive impact for nature and also support farmers and support landowners. These are the types of activities that we want to pursue. And I think in particular it's important. You mentioned farm income. Succession is a huge problem with farming as well. So these are issues I think we can tackle with a fund, in terms of being able to support landowners to do the right thing for nature. But again, I unequivocally condemn all of the indiscriminate fires that have been set around the country in recent weeks.
Thank you, Minister Noonan and Deputy O'Casig, for dealing with that important matter.